Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the state of Virginia and its upcoming 2025 November elections. In case you aren't aware, Virginia is holding its gubernatorial election in November, as well as its elections for state attorney general and state lieutenant governor. This is one of the most important elections of the year, and I haven't talked about it in a little over a month, so we're checking back in specifically on Virginia, and we're discussing the fact that the Democratic Party seems to have built up a pretty clear lead in this race. Now, we got a poll yesterday from VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University. This is a local pollster. And among other things, they showed that in the governor's race, the Democrat Abigail Spanberger, who is a former member, or is actually a current member of the, or is a former member of the House, actually, running against the current lieutenant governor, Winsome Earl Sears, Spanberger holds a 12-point lead in this race, which is pretty substantial, especially at this point, as it's only July. It's not October yet. So let's focus on this race for a second. We're going to talk a little bit later on about the races for lieutenant governor and attorney general, but in all three of these races, Democrats hold leads that are quite substantial. And we can see, even in the race where Republicans have an incumbent, the race for attorney general, they're down by 9. But we're going to start with governor because I think that in Virginia, in these elections, everything kind of trickles down from governor, right? Generally speaking, the governor or the candidate for governor is the most well-known. It's often used as the most consequential race, so it kind of decides the dynamic. And I fully believe that had Republicans not gained momentum in the 2021 governor's race and flipped it, they wouldn't have been as competitive as they were in the races for lieutenant governor and attorney general. Remember, in 2021, the GOP was able to win the race for governor in what was a very interesting election. And as a result, they were kind of dragged across the finish line in the races for attorney general and for lieutenant governor. So in 2021, what happened was really interesting. At this point in time in July, Glenn Youngkin was not favored to win. Terry McAuliffe still held a pretty clear lead in the polls. And if you actually take a look at the polls that were released in July at this point, we can see, actually notably, Glenn Youngkin didn't even lead a poll till the beginning of September. So we saw pretty clearly that Democrats who have been winning Virginia federally for over, really the past 15 years, Democrats began with the lead. But as Youngkin began to close the gap and make the race competitive by running a stronger campaign, we saw the polls went back and forth. And on election day, some forecasters even kind of went out on a limb and, like Sabato's crystal ball, picked the Republicans to win this race narrowly. And that trend was kind of followed in the races for lieutenant governor and for attorney general, where Republicans gained steam because they had momentum at the top of the ticket. And I think that the exact opposite might be happening in 2025, because in theory, Virginia could be competitive. It is only a state that voted for Kamala Harris by 5.8%, which is, it wasn't a nail biter. It wasn't like a Wisconsin or a Georgia, but it also wasn't a deep blue state like neighboring Maryland or Delaware. It was clearly towards Harris, but not by an insurmountable amount. And it's important to note that this was actually a margin smaller than the 2020 margin. And so, you might think, oh, well, if Joe Biden won Virginia by 10 points in 2020 and Republicans flipped it the next year at the governor's level, if Kamala Harris only won it by 6 this time, couldn't Republicans hold on to it again? And initially, there was maybe minor hope among Republicans that things were developing to their advantage in Virginia. Early on this year, maybe. They got the candidate they wanted in Winsome Earl Sears, who she won statewide last time. So on paper, she could be a candidate for them. But since then, I think a number of things have happened. First of all, the GOP, I don't think, has run an effective campaign statewide in Virginia. I don't believe that Winsome Earl Sears has been able to raise as much money as Spanberger. She hasn't been able to get her name out as much. And even though she's a statewide official, a lot of people don't know who the lieutenant governor is. It's still it's an important thing to consider. And beyond that, the thing we have to remember is that Virginia is uniquely impacted by the policies of the Trump administration, especially earlier in the year. Like, for example, the cuts brought on by DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, right? Those cuts, they were, obviously parting ways with a number of federal workers. And again, we don't do politics on the channel. I like to say we do elections, not politics. So I'm not going to debate, was that good? Was that bad? Was that necessary? Was that unnecessary? But clearly it impacted Virginia a lot because you had a number of federal workers or people who were close to the government being laid off or having their roles change substantially. It was a pretty big deal, I would say, whether it was good or bad in Virginia. And from what we've seen, Virginia hasn't really been too fond of this. In the same poll, we can see that Donald Trump's approval rating is negative 15%. He only 40% of people approve of him, despite the fact that 46% voted for him last November. 55%, a clear majority, disapprove of him. Now, it's the good news for Republicans. Their current governor, Glenn Youngkin, pretty popular. He's plus 10 statewide, not bad at all. So what is there to consider at this point? Well, we know that Republicans haven't run a great campaign. I've talked about that. They haven't been able to raise a lot of money. They haven't been able to get the name of their candidate out. And I believe that Democrats, on the other hand, have been able to raise more money. And I think as a result, they've run a stronger campaign. Although it's still early, things can change. Glenn Youngkin didn't really gain a ton of momentum until probably late August or early September, as I just showed you. But more notably, I think the single biggest challenge facing the GOP in this race, and it's partially related to Trump, but it's more just a broad historical trend, is that Virginia tends to like to vote for in its off-year gubernatorial elections for the party that just lost the White House. Now, I don't mean that in the sense that they feel bad and they want to give the victory to the party that just lost the big election, but what we often see is a uniquely, not uniquely American, but a kind of profoundly American phenomenon, and that is thermostatic public opinion. And what I mean by that is that the party out of power, they lose the election, and people are mad at them in that election because obviously they lose. And then within a year or two, people are mad at the party in power. It's we hate whoever's in power, and that's why in the past century, like I think 98% of midterms or 96% of midterms, the party out of power has gained House seats. It is a trend unlike any other in American politics. It is one of the most fundamental rules of off-year elections. And Virginia represents this very well because even in 2021, after voting for Joe Biden by double digits in 2020, they went around because they were mad at, I think partially because they were mad at the Democratic Party, they elected a Republican governor. 2017, to be fair, Virginia voted for Hillary Clinton, but the country as a whole elected Donald Trump. Virginia voted for a Democratic governor. Now, 2013 to the one exception, but it was very close, and I think a lot of Republicans will tell you that the Libertarian candidate really potentially cost them this race, but again, still very close, so it wasn't like a decisive thing. 2009, Virginia voted for Barack Obama. Obama won a landslide, but Republicans got a big victory in the race for governor in 2009. And then if you go back to 2005, Virginia voted for George W. Bush. The country as a whole voted for George W. Bush, but Tim Kaine, a Democrat, won the election for governor. So, and I think 2001 is also interesting in the sense that a Democrat won the election for governor by 5%, even though the state voted for George W. Bush and not in 2000, and George W. Bush was elected president. So in every election, with the exception of 2013, in the century of the 2000s, we've seen Virginia vote for the party out of power in their governor's race. Part of that might be the proximity to D.C. I think a bigger part of it is just the fact that Virginians, like most Americans, tend to be frustrated with the status quo, so they vote for the opposite of the status quo. In 2021, the opposite of the status quo was voting for the Republicans. In 2025, Democrats now have that advantage going for them. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this election, just to kind of contextualize it. We have to understand is that this was not, there's a lot of elections that are kind of like coalitional in the sense that, like one part of the state or one block of voters will really propel a candidate to victory. 2021 was not exactly like that. And this is a map of the swing from president in the 2020 election to governor in the 2021 election. So really this is just showing, I can actually turn these labels off because they don't really matter. But this is really just showing like how much each state house district in Virginia trended towards Glenn Youngkin. The darker the shade of red, like this or this, that means it trended more towards Youngkin, whereas a lighter shade of red, kind of like a pink or orange maybe, less of a trend. But obviously Glenn Youngkin outperformed Trump in every single House district in the state of Virginia. So it was clear. And this is what I mean by it wasn't a coalitional election, right? It wasn't like Glenn Youngkin did really, really well in the D.C. suburbs, but he lost a little bit of ground in the rural kind of like, Shenandoah Valley region up here, right? No, it was across the state he gained. He outran Donald Trump. And so I think 2025 could be the opposite of this in the sense that right now Republicans are hurting. Trump's not popular in Virginia, and Democrats have run a strong campaign for governor. As a result, It's July; they're already up by 12. And in these other races, right? Like it isn't just. And by the way, it isn't just like a people like Abigail Spanberg, or she uniquely has been a good campaign. Democrats are winning races for lieutenant governor pretty decisively, and they're beating out the incumbent Republican attorney general by 9 points. So keep that in mind. Definitely keep that in mind. But I think 2025 is going to be interesting because there doesn't really seem to be any part of the state where Democrats are weak or particularly strong in. Their candidate for governor is kind of from the Nova area up here. Their candidate for I believe for lieutenant governor is Ghazala Hashmi, who's from Richmond, and then their their candidate for attorney general, Jay Jones, is from Virginia Beach. So Democrats have strength in all three of the state's biggest metro areas. And what we were kind of seeing is that if the backlash to Trump in Virginia does materialize, I don't think it'll only be in Nova. I don't think it'll only be in, the university, like in Charlottesville. I don't think it'll only be in Richmond. I think it'll be across the state. And so I have revised my expectations. If you watch me at the end of the year, I think I had this race as a lean D race. I think it's a clearly likely Democratic race at this point. The party has clearly run, I think, a better campaign thus far. That could change, but as of right now, I'm calling it as I see it. And we don't have a ton of polling. We had a bit more at this point in 2021, but I think that it'll start to pick up, certainly more so in the coming days, or really weeks, I should say. And then finally, what I think is also interesting is that Republicans seem to be on the defensive, I would say, with regard to this election. I'm starting to see like a kind of a setting back of expectations from a lot of Republicans. It seems as though they don't think this race is as winnable as they thought it was 6 months ago. And it's interesting to me to think about how the GOP is going to, kind of survive this year. Because obviously we've talked about the race for governor between Spanberger and Winsome Earl Sears, right? And Republicans are already, at this point, it seems more likely to lose this race. But talking about the other races here, control of the state house will be determined. So there are 100 districts. All 100 of them in the state house will be up for grabs. Democrats hold a 2-seat majority. I think it's likely they expand on that majority. And then also, you look at the races for lieutenant governor, which Republicans won in 2021, as well as the race for attorney general, which Republicans won in 2021. I think Republicans are looking at, or are kind of walking into a wipeout election. And I don't mean that to say that this is like a blue wave that's going to take the whole country. No. But I think that at this point, if they're losing the governorship by 12 and their incumbent attorney general is losing by 9, they might be on their way to actually losing all of these statewide offices by decisive margins, by more than Trump lost it by in 2024. And they might also lose a bunch of seats in the state house, where right now they have 49. They have 49 out of 100. That's not bad at all. So clearly, I think the Republicans are on the defensive, and this to me has not been a result that was like set in stone from the get-go. Again, if you watched me earlier this year, I was not predicting like a huge blue wave in Virginia. I always said Democrats were going to narrowly win back the governorship, but to me that seems more and more likely, and by a bigger margin by the day. So the Republicans, I think this is a concerning development for them. Absolutely. It doesn't bode well for them, at least in House elections in 2026, because they have 1 to 2 to 3 even competitive congressional seats to defend here, or to play in here, I should say. And it's going to be interesting to watch. And so as of right now, I know this isn't like a huge prediction video. I'll do one of those probably next week. This is just kind of like a news analysis video. But I do think Democrats are likely to, at least Abigail Spanberger is likely to win her race for governor by more than Kamala Harris won the state back in 2024 by. So we'll talk more about Virginia. We also have New Jersey, which might actually be more interesting even than Virginia, which is not something I would have expected to say even a month ago. But, I guess we're going to keep moving. We're going to see where it takes us. And I will have the Cory Booker presidential analysis video out to you tomorrow. So let me know your thoughts on Virginia. Let me know if you have any ideas for content in the next few days. And I'll see you all next time.